Thank you for joining us on another episode of Latter Gay Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Ashworth, and as always, another exciting episode that we have prepared for you today. We're discussing lesbianism, or at least being gay from a woman's perspective. And I can tell you that I'm really excited and fascinated for this episode for a number of reasons. I think the biggest reason is because we don't hear enough surrounding this topic. This is probably when we deal with sexual identity orientation, it's often from the gay male perspective. And I've really been eager to share the story from the women's perspective. And today's episode is exactly that. The opportunity to empower, to understand, to be vulnerable, to be candid regarding the experiences of our two guests today. So without further ado, and with that out of the way, we want to welcome to the podcast Sarah Cunha and Maddie McConkie.
Hey.
Thank you, Kyle.
Welcome. Thank you for taking a few minutes out of your time.
Yeah.
Out of your busy day to come out and tell your story.
Hopefully we give you something good.
That's actually a really great point, because a lot of people who fear coming on a podcast like this say my story is just normal. I don't have much to tell.
Yeah.
And ironically, the remarkably normal stories are the ones that resonate the most to the community.
That's fair.
Because there are a lot of people out there who are just like you, and they maybe even think that the stories are bigger than they really are, but the reality is it's line upon line, precept upon precept for every one of us.
Totally. Yeah. And that's true. Like, Maddie loves podcasts, and she'll be like, I really loved what this person said, and it really resonated with me, and other things I'll feel differently. I'll be like, I really like this part. So it's true that everybody's stories matter, because everybody connects differently.
Yeah. So Sarah Cunha, Madison McConkie. Sarah and Maddie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay, and you're cute together.
Yeah, we look like missionaries today, but that's all right.
Are you selling me a message?
You know?
Yes. The gays convert.
Would you like to become a lesbian?
It's a wonderful institution. I highly recommend it. I was once into girls.
Hey.
There you go.
But that's a different podcast.
That's fair.
Where do we start? Who do we start with? Let's start with Maddie then.
Okay.
I think the great part about this podcast, this episode, is maybe we don't have to spend a lot of time about personal experiences, but what I think really drew me to your story was the coming out experience, the recognition of who and what I am, and then that path forward. So I definitely want to understand who Maddie and Sarah were prior to the coming out. So we can spend a few minutes just, where'd you grow up? What was family life like? And then at what point did you realize you were different?
Okay. I grew up in Bountiful, Utah, and my family was very active in the church, super involved. I always get asked if I'm related to Bruce R. McConkie from my name, and I am. He was my grandpa's brother, and that kind of influenced a lot of my growing up, and even still how my family is. My family likes to kind of dive deep into the gospel and get into the deep doctrine stuff. And so that was something that I always enjoyed as well. And I loved everything about the church. I loved Young Women's. I loved Girls Camp. I loved church ball. And I also grew up playing soccer and basketball. And so, and then I went and played soccer at Dixie State for a couple years. And then I went on a mission to New Jersey, and that was a great experience for me. And then I just recently graduated. So.
You graduated college?
Yeah.
And where did you go to school?
Dixie. Yeah, I went to Dixie and studied social studies. I want to be a high school teacher. So.
Exciting.
Yeah, it's good.
Sarah.
That's me. Same thing. I'm from, we moved around a little bit, but I'm mostly from California. Dos Palace, California, specifically Central Valley, where nothing is, farm town. The youngest of 6, very Mormon family. Great childhood. Parents are great. Siblings are great. Also loved the church. In my teenage years, I had a little bit a harder time with it. I think just because I was trying to figure myself out and trying to figure out where I fit in the church and all that kind of stuff. And this was before I really understood anything about my sexuality, but always had questions. Always had questions that needed answers and I couldn't figure them out. I'm trying to remember what else I'm supposed to say. Went to BYU. Studied information technology, which was awesome. BYU was a great experience. Obviously, there was some internal conflict on a few things. But BYU was awesome. I was in BYU Noteworthy, BYU's female a cappella group for 3 years. And that was a wonderful experience. I love Noteworthy. I love what they do. It was a really great opportunity for me.
Yeah, I mean, we should back up a little bit. Matt Easton, Charlie Bird, closeted, noteworthy beatboxer for BYU.
It's a trend of noteworthy beatboxers.
Oh yeah,
Courtney Jensen.
Stacey Harkey, Courtney Jensen.
Yeah.
There are some up-and-coming closeted BYU students. Are there any more left at BYU?
We're going to let them figure that out.
I think this is a great trend. It's exciting.
Yeah, it's fun. It's scary, but it's a good thing. Actually, the current beatboxer of Noteworthy, at least I think she's still doing it. They performed at the North Star Conference. And she came out on stage. And that blew my mind. I never imagined being able to do that as a representative of BYU, to be so upfront and forward about your sexuality. That was that hit me super hard. And I've been out of it for a couple of years now. And I'm like, things are changing.
Postscript here. If you want to maintain your sexuality, do not beatbox for BYU.
Yeah, but for real.
I mean, you maintained your sexuality.
Yeah.
Good point. Whew, she got us there.
Yep.
All right, Maddie. At what point did you realize you were different?
I think it was towards the beginning of high school. Yeah. It was around then that I realized I was attracted to women. And I started to kind of make connections of, maybe these intense friendships that I've had where I felt like, why doesn't anyone but me know how to be a good friend? Because I felt like a good friend meant being totally invested, and which obviously was not their problem. But so it was interesting to kind of make some of those connections. But yeah, so I figured that out in high school, and then I didn't really think that it was necessarily going to change my life that much. I had a lot of shame with that, of feeling like people at church, if they knew, then they would see me as one of them instead of one of us. And so that was something that worried me, but I didn't really think it was going to change my life too much. I felt like my patriarchal blessing said I was going to marry a man in the temple, and so that was how things were going to work out. I didn't really understand how, but I was like, well, I guess that'll work out, and I'll somehow be happy about it whenever it happens. And so yeah, it was kind of an evolution for a few years after that to kind of realize, okay, no, this is a bigger thing. This affects my life in a lot of other ways. So.
What about you, Sarah?
I knew I was different since I was born, because I've always been a little bit different, been a little bit crazy, but I was in more denial, I think, than Maddie was. because there were lots of signs. People I had feelings for, just my natural personality and behavior. There were a lot of signs, and I wouldn't allow myself to even think about it. Like, to think about me as potentially being a lesbian, which that word felt like a curse word. Like, it even more than gay, it felt like the only times I had ever heard the word lesbian were in such negative connotations. And so I, like, all through high school, the beginning of college, I wouldn't even let it cross my mind. My sexuality, I didn't even really start broaching the subject until, like, my second relationship with a girl. Which is really sad to say, because you'd think the first one would have been a tip, but...
Some of us are slow learners.
Yeah, really slow learners, honestly. Yeah, it was... The first one I kind of rationalized as, like, that was just, like, a blip. I just fell in love with that one person, and... But, like, I'm on the straight and narrow, and it's gonna be fine. And then the second one, I was like, all right, there's a pattern here that I probably shouldn't ignore. Plus, I don't really like men, so that's kind of an issue. So, yeah.
So, you both struggled with this identity. Some of it, you indicated, came from the church. There were teachings, feelings, overall, maybe not even perfectly written, but understood that this just isn't who or what you should be. What were your family situations like? How did your family pick up on signs? Were they curious about your sexuality? Were they trying to steer you in a different direction? Or how did your families deal with your identity or your sexual orientation, maybe as they did or did not understand?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. Growing up, I was definitely a tomboy. And I never really tried to hide it. In junior high and high school, I felt a little bit more like I should be trying to look different and act different. And I tried a little bit, but it was just too much of a stretch for me to really try with, like, wearing makeup and keeping up with whatever girl fashions. And my family was fine with all of that. My mom was a big athlete. She played 3 sports in college. And so for me to be super into sports and kind of a jock was fine with her. It wasn't, I don't think, something that really worried her. She did try to encourage me to be a little more girly as I got closer to dating age, because she didn't want me to be lonely and not have people be interested in me, not have guys be interested in me. But for the most part, that wasn't too big of a deal. I don't know if they guessed. We haven't really talked about it. I've had a few conversations with my mom about the fact that I'm gay. Probably like 2 conversations with my dad about it. And so I don't really know all their thoughts on that. I remember growing up that I think I read a book in high school that was written by Ellen DeGeneres, and I loved it. And my mom was, like, kind of concerned about that it was like a bad influence or something. So she might have...
Ellen made you gay.
Yeah, she might have been, like, kind of recognizing something and trying to steer me away from any bad influences.
I think we laugh about that a little bit, but I think that was a very real result of the whole Ellen DeGeneres phenomenon, where parents were saying, we can't watch that because it might And I think that still perpetuates even in some family circles today. Yeah. So you laugh a little, Sarah, but I think there's something to that.
No, there definitely is.
Like, don't even touch the pages; it might wear off. Like, it might bleed through. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or I mean, I saw it in my own family. We're not going to watch that show. Like,
And I think I heard a lot that it was one of the like signs of the times that same-sex relationships were getting normalized. And it was just such a terrible thing. And
or we were creating more gays.
Yeah.
Yeah, because these things would create more gay people. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and I remember kind of as I started to recognize it in myself that I was queer, that I was desperate for it to be normalized. I needed to feel normal. I feel like the opposite of normalizing things is kind of demonizing things, and I think that that's kind of what the church is, at least some people in the church are doing, and that just seems very unhelpful to me and from my experience.
Sarah, your family, how did they... Were there signs of the times? Were there things going on? And I mean, you already said tomboy, didn't fit the norm. How did your family deal with it?
My mom said something to me once that was interesting. She said, I always knew you were different. Like, you were different than my other kids. And I'm the fifth of the girls. There's 6 of us in my family. There's only one other boy. The fifth of the girls. And she was like, I thought I, like, had girls down pat, you know, but you were just different than everybody else. And I didn't really know what that meant. And she didn't know what it meant. Like, both of my parents have said, like, we had no idea. We didn't really think about it much, you know. All the rest of my family, as far as I know, are, you know, cis, straight. And so I was the anomaly. And, like, they always loved me for who I was, and they pushed me forward in sports, and they like wanted me to do what I wanted to do, so that it didn't feel like they were like, you should dress girly or anything like that. Like, my mom isn't super girly, so I think she didn't care that I didn't care about those things either. Yeah. Although, speaking of family kind of being afraid of creating the gay, I had an interesting conversation with my oldest sister recently where apparently her husband, who still kind of believes that it's more of a nurture than nature thing, that people kind of are built into a gay instead of born gay.
They watched too much Ellen and they read too many of her books.
Right. And my sister said something to the effect of, he feels responsible. And I was like, excuse me, what? Yeah, I was kind of offended. I was like, how dare you think so much of yourself that you would turn me gay? Like, it was interesting to me because it hit me so hard. Nothing turned me gay. Like, when she said that, it very obviously to me was like, no, I was born this way. Like, there was nothing you could do about it. Even if he has acted like a jerk sometimes, that doesn't make me hate men, you know? Like, yeah, it's so funny to me. And I used to believe that you were born that way. It was a choice, you know, that's the vernacular you hear in the church. And it hits me so true that it, like, is such an integral part of me and of queer people, LGBTQ. Like, it's such a fundamental part of us that it's not, yeah, there are influences in our lives that help us to kind of figure ourselves out, but it's not what defines what we are. We define what we are.
It's a great point. It's just an ingredient in the whole. It isn't the cookie.
Right.
It's the baking powder.
Right.
But there are 30 other ingredients that make it really great.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I understand, and I think a lot of listeners of the podcast will understand that as well, who would identify as LGBTQ, where those who don't identify may look at that and say, oh no, being gay is all encompassing, like that is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe someone in the community, in the LGBT community, would say, no, it's just a piece of me.
Yep.
There are other great things, like I'm an artist and a musician and a friend and those other things that make up who I am.
Totally. That's, Maddie and I talk about this quite often, actually, because I have been fairly quiet about things. Like, I'm not super loud on social media. In person, I'm very loud, obviously. But in social media and things like that, I tend to kind of back off in kind of like the pride of it all. Because it doesn't feel like it's what defines me. Like, it's a cool part of me. Like, I love being gay. I love Maddie. And I love being able to be open about that. But it's not like, oh yeah, Sarah, she's the gay one. You know, like,
Yeah.
People would identify me more as like a nerd than they would being a lesbian. You know, it's just another piece of me that is really important and dear to me. But it's not everything by any means.
So at what point did you really capitalize on this idea? And let's jump in age-wise. I'm gay, I'm lesbian, that's my reality. When did that hit, and what was that experience?
It's hard because even labels change. Like, you might know that you're attracted to the same sex, but you might call it same-sex attraction, and then gay, and then for a lot of people, lesbian, like for a lot of gay women, they identify more as that, and that's the word they use,
Gay.
rather than lesbian, and that tends to be kind of a further down the road of getting comfortable with themselves type of thing. But I think before my mission, I thought that I was bisexual. And it wasn't, and then kind of on my mission, I started to realize, maybe I am, but it's like a 75-25 thing.
You're a Kinsey 4, and
Yeah.
you're just not sure you're ready to jump that ship yet.
And then it was probably after my mission that I realized that while I do think that some men are very good looking, that it's different. And so that I don't identify as bisexual.
But if Chris Hemsworth ever hears this podcast, that's her guy.
That's the exception.
That's the exception.
Be careful, Sarah.
I mean, if he wants to...
I know people.
But I think also before my mission, it never connected for me that I had never dated guys much at all. I'd gone to like a couple dances in high school, but they were always girls' choice, and they were always like, the soccer team's doing this, so ask someone. And then in college, I went on a couple dates, but really not very many at all. And in my mind that whole time, I didn't connect being gay to not having much success with dating guys, because I was like, well, I'm not even in a relationship with them, so this hasn't come into play. And it took till like after my mission, realizing that I don't usually even make much of an effort to get to know guys. Like, they're very off my radar, even socially, and who I want to be friends with. And so it took that long to connect that, oh, maybe like if you're not even interested in talking to guys, that could be connected to the fact that you're gay, and also connected to the fact that you don't date. So
Maybe you really should have read Ellen's book.
That was quite the epiphany. Yeah. No, I think I did read. I finished reading the book. I just didn't show my mom that I was still reading it.
What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I think what Maddie says rings true for sure. It took me a long time to even allow myself to say maybe I'm bi.
And you went through that same method? I'm bi?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, to me, it wasn't a possibility for me to be gay or lesbian, because that would mean I'd have to be alone forever, and that sounds horrible. And so gay was just like off the table. Like that was not even a thought. Because everything that came with it was so devastating. Either I was abstinent, alone forever, and still always on the margins, you know, like always kind of fitting in, but not really. Or I lose my religion, lose my family potentially, and for something that I was taught was evil and would never bring me happiness. So that defining myself in that way I didn't allow that for years. And honestly, I think that was a big reason for a lot of internal conflict, because I didn't have the words to define what I was what I was feeling, because those words were evil. And so there was this constant conflict of, these are the feelings I'm having. You can't have those feelings, so they have to be something else. So yeah, I don't think I even started to think maybe I'm bisexual. Not cognitively anyways. There was always little worries. Like when I was young, I was probably 10 or 11 years old. Still a tomboy, obviously, and people would be like, what are you, a lesbian? You know? Apparently I don't want to be a lesbian because those people get made fun of. And I was just trained to be like, no, I'm just a tomboy. I'm just like super cool, but I'm not a lesbian. Who knew that would make you even more cool, honestly. But but yeah, but in the back of my head, I was like, maybe I am. I don't really understand what that means, but maybe. No, I can't be. So college, I was probably 19, maybe 20 when I was like, this is an issue. This is something that I need to figure out. And it felt like something I couldn't really figure out. So I kind of identified as same-sex attracted bi until I was like 23. And I was like, I'm gay. Like I'm a full-on lesbian, you know? Once I kind of came to that realization, once I allowed myself to start saying it out loud, once I was like, this is who I am and this is how I understand my feelings, that paved the way for a lot of healing, because I was able to name what I was feeling. I was able to take the shame out of what I was feeling. Because when I was like, oh, I'm just bi, like just bi. No offense to the bi people, bi is great. But that
bi was a safe place.
It gave me an out,
yeah.
You know, like, oh, men are still an option, you know, like I can still somehow have a temple marriage, even if it's like maybe not 100% the Mormon way, you know. Yeah.
So let's talk about support groups or places that you were able to find strength in this navigation. I know both of you, where we mentioned North Star a little. Where was your first landing spot? Where did you reach out to? What resources did you feel were available, or what resources did you find to start that navigation into understanding your sexuality?
For me, shortly before my mission, I stumbled across the Voices of Hope videos that North Star has. And I was just devouring those, watching as many as I could. I watched all like 4 of the women's videos, and then some of the ones from the men. And it was a starting place for me to feel like, okay, not everyone who's gay has left the church. There are some people who are making this work and identify as both Mormon and gay, and it started to make me feel like, okay, I think I can settle that within myself a little bit, because I am both of these things. So if other people are figuring that out and making it work, then maybe I can too. I remember I watched Gina Peterson's video on there, and then I messaged her on Facebook, And it was literally like less than a month before I was leaving on my mission. And so a little while later when she got back to me, I was like, well, this is great. And she was like, okay, like, how can I support you? And I was like, well, I'm about to go to New Jersey. So I don't know, but it was good. Thank you for getting back to me. And then when I got back from my mission, I got back in the summer of 2016. And that November, there was like a North Star Women's Retreat thing that I saw on their Facebook pages. And it was in Vegas, and I was in St. George for college. And so I was like, okay, I could go to that. And I was kind of terrified because I'd never met any of these people in person. And I was like, am I really going to just go to Vegas to meet up with these random people that, like, all I know about them is that they're Mormon and they're lesbians? Like, that seems like a questionable choice. But then, so I didn't commit to going and staying for the weekend, but I drove down for the day. And it was my first time meeting other gay Mormon women. I doubt that very many of them would consider themselves lesbian, so gay, but and it was amazing. It was my first time being like, these are my people. Like, I totally get them and they get me, and it was so great. I remember we went to a Cheesecake Factory, and at one point 2 of them were like arm wrestling. I was like, sure, why not? And it was fun to get to know these people in person, and I really enjoyed being with them and getting to know them, and I looked up to them a lot, and that was a game changer for me because I was able to see that we had this thing in common, and that it was part of why I liked and respected them so much, and that I didn't see it as a negative thing in them. So then why did I see it as a negative thing within myself? And it really changed how I saw myself. So then that next spring I went to the North Star Conference, and that was a really good experience for me. And then the next year, that fall, there was another women's retreat that I went to, and then the next spring I went to another conference. And things had changed a fair amount for me by then, and I was like, well, okay, I don't know if this still fits, because for a while it was really a good place for me it felt safe because I could explore this part of myself and see this part of myself as not a negative thing, but it didn't mean I had to leave the church.
You're saying the thing that didn't fit was who I am and who others think I should be on a spiritual, religious level?
Yeah. So by the time the second North Star Conference came around, I had already dated a girl for a little while, and so my feelings about that had changed, about how I saw that and if that was a good path for me or not. And so it was like, okay, I don't think that this is necessarily fitting anymore, but for a while it was a good place for me. And then after that, I kind of went just to affirmation, and it felt like a similar idea, but that it kind of fit where my path was at that point a lot better. And so, from there I went and got more involved in affirmation.
Oh, and so support groups for you, Sarah, where were you finding, where did you find your path? What brought you out of the woodwork and then onto the trail of understanding who and what I am?
Sure. I think it took a little bit more drastic efforts for me than it did for Maddie.
And we should probably side note again, you were BYU, like
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of things there were factors different for you than for other people.
I was at BYU. I was in Noteworthy. I was performing publicly for Noteworthy, and that felt like a really important thing. It also felt really confusing. Part of my time in Noteworthy, I was in a relationship with somebody, which was really conflicting.
You already have your diploma, right?
I have my diploma, yes.
Okay, great. So,
We're good.
because the Honor Code Office, I'm sure, they love our podcast.
I'm sure they do. That they do their best, you know. But actually, like, a lot of times I was super honest with my bishops that I had while I was at BYU, and I was really trying to do what was best while also trying to figure out, like, my depression and anxiety and this thing that I didn't understand, and my relationship that was up and down and sideways, and sometimes there were bishops involved and sometimes there weren't, and the person that I was with was also super Mormon, so we were both trying to figure it out. It wasn't, being together wasn't really what we wanted, but we also didn't understand our sexuality, and so I don't know. It was hard. It was
a learning process for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a learning process, and it was hard. So the first resources I had were my bishops, and honestly, like, some people have had really bad experiences with their bishops. I had great experiences with my bishops at BYU. They were amazing. They listened. Sometimes they didn't understand. Sometimes they did try to understand. Some were more helpful than others. They referred me to therapists and things like that, and they really just wanted my success. In a few instances, they probably gave me advice that wasn't necessarily helpful, just by the nature of church doctrine and things like that. But I really have the most respect for bishops who really try to understand their members, and especially the members that are really going through some hard stuff that they don't understand.
In a broad sense, not to call out a specific bishop, but did either of you have a bishop or a church leader who encouraged you to date and encouraged you to explore this path?
I had a bishop, basically the last bishop that I have talked to, I told him, hey, I'm dating Maddie, and this is what I want. Like, this is kind of the path that I'm happy this way. And he was like, okay. I can kind of see the wheels turning in his head. Like, how do we spin this? Because I still wanted to kind of be in the church, and I cared about the ward, and and he's like, okay, well, we can't have you speaking publicly or praying publicly, but, like, I don't feel like we have to do any kind of disciplinary action unless, let's just treat this like it seemed like he was kind of trying to make do with what he had, and I love him for it.
You got a strength of youth, so no heavy petting, and then you have the missionary white handbook that companions aren't supposed to sleep in the same bed, so you mix those two together and you have your relationship.
Right, exactly. And I was like, okay. I didn't follow his advice for very long, but but I appreciated that. I appreciated that he was really trying to kind of work with me, and he was like, okay, this is where you're at, let's work with it. He didn't say, it was a little bit hard for me to hear, like, you can't pray publicly and you can't speak publicly. That was really painful.
Yeah, I don't see how that was overly helpful in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm happy that a bishop didn't immediately move towards a disfellowshipment or probation situation, and was open to that. Let's just jump into some current topics. April 4th, 2019, the church rescinds the November 2015 policy, saying that they'll treat relationships, homosexual relationships, the same as heterosexual relationships, which we're now starting to see the impacts of that. As bishops and stake presidents, area authorities are now discussing how that plays out, and there is some leeway given to relationships, which, if the church is going to allow that on a global level, the homosexual relationships would fall under the same categories of heterosexual relationships in terms of dating and allowable things, which would mean the Honor Code Office is updated. The Honor Code is updated.
Yes.
What impact would that have made on your life as a BYU student?
Oh.
And what do you think that will do to BYU?
I personally, I think it's great. while I was at BYU, I had this, I really felt like, you know, I chose to sign the honor code. I'm an adult. Like, I need to follow in it. And if I don't like it, then, like, I can leave. You know, no one's keeping me here. And to an extent, I feel that way. Like, if the honor code doesn't work for you, don't go to BYU. Because it's going to be a pain. But at the same time, I do think that the honor code can work better for its students instead of against them. I think I put a lot of pressure and responsibility on myself when I didn't know myself. Like, I didn't even know that I was LGBTQ when I got into BYU. And then once you're in BYU, leaving, I mean, once you're in any college and you're going through a path and you have a program, like, for me, leaving didn't feel like an option. It felt like, okay, I just have to do this until I get out, you know? And looking back on it now, I am a little bit upset because it's a lot of damage could have been really lessened, at least, if there was more openness. I wasn't so terrified of being kicked out, of being disciplined, just for trying to figure out what even was going on with my body, with my mind. Like, there was no point ever where I was like, I'm going to be rebellious. There was no point where I wanted to stick it to the man or be a problem, ever. And I think that's what was so frustrating, was because I was doing everything that I could. And I wanted to be good. And it wasn't just that the system was against me, but I felt like I couldn't even work with the system while I was trying to figure it out. Yeah, it wasn't my system.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to be. I believed in it. But I had this thing that I was trying to figure out that was so taboo that I was afraid that if I even told a bishop that I thought I had feelings for a woman, that, like, some kind of disciplinary action was going to happen. And because some bishops did act like that. Luckily, all of mine were really great, but I heard horror stories, you know. I think that having an updated policy that kind of allows you to figure out what's going on without threat of kicking you out of school, of possibly kicking you out of the church that you've grown up in, is huge. Like, for the mental health of LGBTQ students at BYU, especially ones that are just figuring it out, I think that's going to be huge.
What is your opinion? And this is completely down the hypothetical rabbit hole. Both of you were in that situation where you weren't full-on gay. You also hadn't had relationship experiences with an opposite sex. So if the church is willing to open the door to gay dating, same-sex dating, do you think there would that would give a positive impact, or would it be beneficial to those questioning people who, in a typical Mormon experience, you just do nothing on the same-sex side? Mm-hmm. You say, okay, well, I find somebody that's mildly attractive that I think I can make it work with, and then you get married, then you're sealed in the temple, and you look back and say, a few weeks after your wedding day or on your wedding night, and say, this isn't going to work. Right. And that's because the culture within the church has always been no sex, the law of chastity, no exploration of sexual experience. But maybe opening up the opportunity to allow people to date both same-sex and opposite sex. Do you think, hypothetically, that, and I know you somewhat answered that, but Maddie, also your opinion, that could have a positive benefit on questioning people within Mormon society?
Theoretically, yes. I think it's hard to know how far bishops and church leaders would actually feel free to go with that, because I also had a bishop who, when I started my first relationship, I talked to him about it, and he was willing to treat it like a regular straight dating couple. And so I did kind of have that flexibility a little bit. And for me, that was a blessing because it kept me near the church. If he had drawn a hard line, then I would have just said, okay, well, then I can't even be involved with the church anymore. So by him giving me that leeway, I was able to stay involved in the church for a lot longer than I would have. But my perspective at that time was that, okay, I'm exploring this, I'm seeing how I feel about it, but with what I'm feeling, it's just kind of a matter of time until I get past what the church can be okay with. And so it was better than a harsh response, but it still was just kind of like, well, it's just a matter of time and there's still not a path for me in the church. And so I feel like that's how I would guess a lot of people would feel about it, as far as people being able to explore, and so they're less likely to get into a mixed orientation marriage and then realize that this won't work. If bishops were willing to encourage and counsel questioning youth to explore, and even if they say, like, stay within the bounds of the law of chastity, but you can explore this, then that could maybe help. But I don't know. I have a hard time picturing a bishop feeling like they could give that kind of counsel, because it's still a dead-end street.
Yeah, and I can only look at what the church released on April 4th and said, we will treat homosexual relationships just like heterosexual relationships. And I am very eager to see how they define that.
Right.
Because on paper, it sounds like a same-sex relationship will be treated exactly as a heterosexual relationship. And we know the rules on heterosexual relationships within the church. And I think I also know that there's a large segment of the LGBT LDS community that would be comfortable living within those rules. And so I just wonder, this is more just a hypothetical, round table chat. I really do wonder what positive and negative impacts that would do. In my brain, I can see lots of positives.
Yeah, I see lots of positives. The issue is that dead-end street, is that, I mean, why does a heterosexual relationship start? Why do they start dating in the Mormon church? It's marriage and commitment. And the church has not gotten to a point where marriage and commitment are an option. True, if we got married, we would not be apostates anymore, which is like, huzzah. That's great. Mm-hmm. But our marriage wouldn't be recognized. We would be potentially up to disciplinary action, and that's... I think for people who are trying to live the gospel in the way that they understand, it still makes it so that happiness isn't really an option. Like, you can like hold their hand, you can date, you can kind of see how you feel, but if you feel that way, where do you go? Like, okay, I figured out I'm gay. So either I'm in a mostly platonic relationship for my whole life, or I'm in abstinence my whole life, or I leave the church. Like, it's progression, don't get me wrong.
Well, in the interim, it provides some flexibility and the ability to grow. I completely understand what you're saying. The long term, the longevity idea of that policy, overturning of that policy, to what end? I get it. Right. Yeah. The church is now essentially allowing the LGBT community to buy some time.
Yeah.
But not necessarily, as Elder Ballard said, find them a place within the church. Mm-hmm. We still have not yet said, well, he says, I believe there's a place for the LGBT people within the church, but nobody's been able to define where that place is at yet.
Right.
Yeah. And I just kind of lost my train of thought, but with that policy being rescinded, it's not enough. But for my personal experience, it's still been a significant blessing. As far as me wanting to keep any kind of relationship with the church. My perspective on the church as of right now is trying to be generous and see the good, and especially because that's still my family, both sides of my family, that's their lives. And then it's still so much of me. And so I don't want to have to cut ties. And so it's a blessing to, even though serious transgression doesn't make me feel very good,
it's better than apostate.
Yeah, and it allows me to keep some kind of connection with the church. Shortly before that, we had been kind of talking about marriage a little bit. And with our therapist, we'd been talking because we were like, what do? We don't want this hanging over our heads. We don't want the consequence of our marriage to be excommunication. Like, we wanted to resolve things before we got there.
Put a damper on, the celebration.
Yeah. So we wanted to resolve things before we got there. And so it was a matter of, okay, so do I remove my records from the church? Or do we go through the disciplinary councils and maybe try to have our voices heard? Maybe there could be some benefit there. But then it was like, we live in a area that neither of us have ever gone to church in, and so we'd be kind of going to a new ward just to be excommunicated, so that didn't really seem very productive either. And so and it felt very violent to feel just kicked out of this church that I've always loved so much. And so it's still hard, but it is nice to have that kind of softened, and to have even being outside of the church, to still be able to kind of have some ties to it.
Let's talk about the closeted or slowly exiting that closet young woman, middle-aged woman, older woman who is just venturing down this path, just realizing, or has realized for years, that she's gay. What is your advice to that person?
My knee-jerk advice is get out, honey. Oh my gosh, it's like so much better. And actually, when I was kind of in that space where I was like, I know I'm in the closet, I kind of don't really like being here, I don't really know what to do. Courtney Jensen, the other lesbian beatboxer from Noteworthy, and I had a conversation, and she said the same thing, like, come out, it's the best thing you could ever do. And at that point in my life, I was like, hell no. Like, never in my life is that gonna happen. There's way too much conflict that, no. And it was probably not even a year after that. And I was like, I'm done with this. So for sure, if you feel safe, if you feel like it could potentially be the right thing to do, oh my goodness, you will learn. There are so many people on your team. There are so many people on your side, including people you wouldn't expect. The support system that comes from you being authentic is insane. I wish I could explain it. And there's always the fear. There's always the fear of rejection, and there's always the fear of what's going to happen, what are the repercussions. But I can promise that even if within your immediate vicinity, if the repercussions are bad, you have a community that is totally got your back. Totally got your back. It's scary. It's terrifying. It took me life or death to get to that point. And it takes a lot of us life or death to get to that point. It takes a lot of us, suicidal attempts and medication and therapy to be able to get to a point where we're like, I can open this door. I can get out of here. Take the time you need, but when you do, there is support, and there doesn't need to be fear. Like, there's no pressure to come out except for you, but it's so good.
So what I'm hearing is the path could be hard.
Yeah.
The path could include ideation, therapy, medications, some depression, but all those are normal part of the process.
Oh, yeah.
That you're not broken
No.
for having those feelings, that you're not alone.
Right.
And then I think the thing that is most encouraging is that your best days are ahead.
Yeah, 100%. Like, when you're in the thick of it, there is nothing anyone can say to you to make it better. There was nothing anyone could say to me to make it better. I was so down deep that no matter what, nothing could get me out of it. God couldn't get me out of it. You know, like, I was there and I had to go through that. And someone telling me, just come out, you'll have support. Like, that wasn't enough. Bishops telling me what to do, therapists. It had to come from me, and it had to come at a certain time. And that sucks to say, because being there is the worst and you just want to get out of it. And I really empathize with people that are in that space, because it is soul crushing. And it feels damning. But like you said, I had no idea that life could be so good. No idea. When people told me that life wasn't that bad, I thought they were insane. Because that was not my experience. From before I could remember. Well, my childhood was good. Probably once I hit puberty was the time that I was like, life sucks. Why do people do this? And it just got worse and worse and worse. And I couldn't understand it. And I'm really happy to say that I was wrong. I was so wrong. I'm so happy. And I get it now, why people enjoy life. But it was hard for a really long time. Yeah.
What is your advice, Maddie, to those closeted individuals?
I think, just to kind of clarify what I think I was hearing from Sarah, is that being suicidal and all of that is not connected to coming out of the closet. Coming out of the closet is not a bad thing that leads you to feel this way, but it's a release, and it's not the only answer, but it's something that helps so much.
It's part of that healing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's part of that healing. When I came out, I had kind of already started to. At one point I was telling my closest friends, but that became a fairly large group of people. And I was telling 5 people a week, almost every day I was coming out to somebody. And at first that was a very difficult conversation of having a hard time even spitting the words out, and lots of tears. And but then it got easier as I kept coming out to people individually. And for me, part of coming out was my appearance as well. I don't identify as trans, but I also realized that I don't present typical cis female.
Gender not normal is the way that I like to describe it.
Yeah. And so for me, that was part of it, is if I look the way I want to look, if I cut my hair, then people are going to think that I'm a lesbian. And so it was getting to the point where I was okay with people thinking that before I could appear the way I wanted to. And so that was a part of the process. And then, so I'd been fairly out to people, especially down in St. George, because I was kind of separated from my family, and so it was like in that world I wasn't really hiding things. But I also at that point wasn't dating or anything, so I wasn't being super blatant about it. But and then I was really wanting to come out publicly, but and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm the oldest and I have 3 younger siblings, and my youngest sibling at that point was 12, I think, and I'd been holding off because I knew that my family didn't really want her to know. They were kind of protecting her from knowing this, and so I was respecting that and just trying to wait as long as I could, but it just felt like this pressure that was building up, and I was like, I understand that this might be difficult for her. I'm not trying to disrespect my parents' wishes, but for me, I need to do this. And in trying to explain that to my mom, I was trying to help her understand that even in all of my interactions, and especially with like my extended family, I'm very close to my extended family. We have a lot of get-togethers, and I felt like if they knew that I was gay, I felt like they would probably be pretty good about it, and that it wouldn't be this terrible thing, but I didn't know for sure. And so there was this constant what if shame of, I think people would be fine, but maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they wouldn't be so loving and treat me so well if they knew. And so that was a big part of coming out for me was, I think people are pretty fine, but I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure that I would be safe. And that fear, I needed to face it. I needed to not be dealing with what ifs in my mind all the time and just be dealing with reality of if people don't handle it well, okay, I can face that, but not just dealing with this imaginary rejection that I couldn't let go of without coming out. So then I ended up coming out publicly on Facebook, and it was great. It was a huge weight off, and just kind of felt like that last step in me just being myself in the way I interact with people, and it was, yeah, I'm so happy that I did that. So,
an interesting lesson taught in Mormonism and among our family circles is that there is no happiness on this side of the aisle, that there's a loss of spiritual experiences. God wouldn't send the Holy Ghost to an apostate person, someone who sins, someone who clearly is contradictory to the whole plan of salvation or the plan of happiness. Does that reflect your experiences?
do you want me to go first?
I don't know, you're pretty miserable. I don't.
No. For me, that was one of the biggest things that held me back from dating women was I had always been taught, and I believed that I would feel so guilty and I would just be miserable, and that there was no true happiness to be found in that. And so that fear kept me in check for a really long time. And then when that wasn't the case, I was shocked. I was just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, like, I feel fine. Okay, maybe
Everything's still good?
I'm
We're
fine.
good?
And yeah, so for me, that was another thing that kind of made me dig into my beliefs of the things I'd always been taught, because if that's not true, and if I don't feel terrible, and if I feel like God still loves me and that this is part of his plan for me and that this is part of me being able to keep progressing, then that's some pretty big contradictions to the things that I've always been taught. And so that part of it was difficult, but it wasn't because I was feeling bad, it was because I wasn't feeling bad. And then also, and again, this is where I'm at right now, spiritually and with the church, I miss the consistent spiritual experiences that I had when I was active in the church. The church is really good at like spoon feeding you spiritual experiences. Like, this is what this space is designed for. There's a very good chance you will feel that if you participate in this. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, and I kind of miss that. But I don't, and so I do feel like I have less consistent spiritual experiences now, but I don't feel like my relationship with God is worse. And I wish that I felt welcome into those spiritual spaces that were rewarding for me for so long. And so when I feel like church leaders are kind of drawing this line and saying, if you're on the other side of the line, you stay far away, we don't want you near, that's hard, because I feel like their job is to invite people to be closer to the Savior. And even if I'm not walking the exact path that they want, why are they pushing me away? Because I don't want to be pushed away. I want to stay as close as I can. And with all of that said, I still feel good spiritually, and I feel like me and God are pretty well on the same page. And I don't know. I've always been very spiritual, and it's hard for me when people treat me like, well, now you're being deceived, now you don't care what God thinks, now you're this different person, because I'm not.
Now
I'm
people no longer care about Maddie.
Yeah.
That's sometimes what happens.
Yeah, and I still feel cared for, but it feels like a loss of respect, because for so many people in my circle, spiritual stature is this like big thing.
I mean, you're a McConkie.
Yeah. And I used to feel that respect, and then to feel like my stories and my experiences aren't believed anymore, it's very painful.
Sarah, loss of spirit, loss of happiness. You do look pretty miserable, so I wanted to bring that up.
Every day is such a struggle. No, I think if you asked anyone that's known me, I am such a better person. I'm so much happier, so much more full now than ever. And a lot of that has to do with Maddie, for sure, because she is wonderful and I love her. But a lot of it doesn't. A lot of it has to do with me, and a lot of it has to do with getting to a place where I was comfortable in my own skin. Like, I'm wearing a tie. Who thought I'd wear a tie? But I always wanted to wear a tie, and now I'm doing it, and it's amazing. And like, little things like that can seem so small, and it's hard to describe why it isn't small. Why it means so much. But yeah, I am over the moon. I feel like my relationship with God is significantly better than it was. Simply because I don't feel like it's a constant battle anymore. Like, I don't feel like it's me just pushing and pushing to fit into this box that didn't make sense. And it wasn't that I was angry with God all the time. It was just that I didn't get it. I was like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I don't get it. Where are you? What even is the point of this? I honestly feel like I had to work really hard for the ability to even build a relationship with God, because I've had to completely redefine him to be able to build that relationship without shame and without feeling like he was a mean dad that was like, you better be straight or else, you know? Because that's how I filled in the blanks with God for a long time. I filled in the blanks of God with the words of other people that I trusted, and said, well, obviously this is how God feels because that's what so-and-so general authority said. So why am I even asking?
Maddie's relative.
Right. We love him. But really, like, I filled in the blanks for a long time, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. It wasn't until I learned to just shut up and listen. It wasn't until I started listening And God's a pretty quiet dude. Like, he's loud when he wants to be, but a lot of times he puts so much trust in his children that he's like, you don't need me to hold your hand. You feel good? I feel good. Continue on. That's been my experience with God, and maybe that's not everybody's. But he's there when I need him, not always there when I want him. And I feel better about that now because I'm taking more control of my life, and it feels like he's happy about that. It feels like that's what he wanted me to do the whole time, was have the faith, have the authority of my own spirituality. Don't let somebody else dictate what my spirituality is. That was a lesson that was really hard for me to learn, was that I have just as much authority as the prophet does of how my spirituality exists and how it manifests. And maybe to some people that sounds blasphemous. I'm sure 5-year-old Sarah would have said that was blasphemous, But it's really empowering. And it makes me feel closer to God because with him trusting me, I trust him. And it's this symbiotic relationship that is growth promoting instead of stunting. And it's hard to explain that to people that see this as sinful. Because they can't kind of get past that feeling. But the love and the joy that I feel now promotes godliness in my life. Specific doctrines and understanding exactly what God is, I mean, that changes day to day for sure. I feel like I'm constantly trying to understand and learn more. And it's a beautiful journey, and maybe I'll get to the other side and God's like totally different than what I imagined, but like cool,
But wouldn't we all have the opportunity to stand at the gates and say, I did the best I could with what I had? I mean, maybe that's something that I've learned most from the LGBT community. Mm-hmm. We tried their way, the heterosexual way. Right. But today I'm just trying to be authentic and honest and true to my own path. Right. And at the judgment bar, I really can stand there and say, I did the very best with what I had. If it was wrong, it was wrong.
Sorry,
But ultimately, the charge is for us to be happy.
Yeah.
And to be honest. And this is my honesty.
Totally.
Any last and final words for the listeners of the podcast? Anything that we didn't bring up that you wanted to talk about and mention?
I think growing up, I was always taught that I should want marriage and family. And then I was also taught, but if you're gay, then you should be happy being by yourself forever. And that never made sense to me. I was like, why am I different from someone else? Why do they deserve that, but I don't? And so now to recognize that God wants me to be just as happy as anybody else. And I do believe that for me, at least, those things, marriage and family and that kind of life, it's what I want. It's what feels most fulfilling to me. And it's exciting to feel like I'm allowed to have that, and I'm allowed to hope for that and envision that. And I am so grateful to have found a partner who we just make each other's lives better. And I think that that's how it should be. I'm so much happier now. Life is consistently so much happier than it was. It hasn't solved all of my mental health problems that I've had for a lot of years. I've struggled with depression for a long time. That hasn't gone away. It's not that I was depressed because I was in the closet. But I have more support now, and I have more resources, and life is just really good.
And you have someone to share that with.
Yeah, and I have that support, and it's kind of helpful that we both struggled with our mental health at times because we get it and we can be there for each other and we can
just cuddle.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
Sometimes
cuddles.
that's all you need. Yeah.
Cuddling solves so many things.
Yes.
Like, I don't know how to fix it, but just come here.
Yep. So yeah, I'm really happy and things are really good, and this, I don't know, it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around now how people can feel, like Sarah was saying, that this is a sin and that this isn't godly, because to me and in my experience, and I mean, that's what people's testimonies are always based on, right? That this is my experience, this is what I felt, this is how it is for me, and that this is godly, and that it's a huge blessing, and I'm very grateful.
It's going to be hard to top that, Sarah.
Shoot, girl. Let's see. I had an experience recently, actually. We were taking some pictures on a rooftop. It was probably 8 or 10 stories up. And I looked over the edge, and I looked at the street at the bottom. It was really far away, and it all of a sudden hit me that was the first time that I can remember being at such a height and not feeling an urge in the back of my brain wanting to jump, wanting to get out. That feeling had been with me for so long that I thought it was just a part of me. I thought it was a part of me. That those thoughts and feelings were always just there. And for it to not be there hit me really hard. It really made me reflect on how far I've come in honestly just a short while, just the last few years. It was a really powerful experience to see that, and I wish so badly to tell people who feel that way that I don't know your situation. I know for me it got better. I know for me it wasn't a part of me. It wasn't forever. There, like, cliche, it gets better, you know? And I don't want to tell anybody how to feel. I don't want to promise them that it gets better for them. But all I know is that for my experience, it did. And I'm so, so grateful that I'm here. I'm so grateful that, we got through that horrible 10 years, where it was just always there. I am so happy, and yeah, not everything's fixed for sure. Both of us are medicated and it's great, 100% respect medication, I used to not. I used to be really ashamed about that. I used to be really ashamed about therapy. But my life is nothing that I expected in all of the good ways. And I can't stress enough how glad I am to still be here. I never thought I would say that. I always thought that I was just waiting to get out. And that life sucks and then you die, so why not die earlier? I was wrong, for sure, for me. Yeah.
I hear throughout this podcast a lot of, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's okay.
It's totally okay. Life is chill. Oh man, life is so much chill now.
So chill, let's put you on the spot. Are you gonna beatbox your way out of the podcast? Beatbox a primary tune.
Beatbox is a primary tune. Are you gonna sing, babe?
Oh.
It's a good primary tune.
How do you even beatbox?
Book of
a
Mormon
tune?
Stories, that's a great one. It's not controversial at all. How do you, I don't know, you just hum with it.
Okay, do it. Show me.
I'm trying to think of one that would...
You can beatbox anything. I don't care. I just think it'd be cool.
Okay.
Is it gonna be real loud if she beatboxes into her
that's
mic?
true.
We'll adjust her mic for
Here, I
her.
got this.
Okay, no, he's adjusting it for you.
Okay.
You got this. There you go.
That was definitely not Book of Mormon Stories.
That's not, no, I'm sorry.
That was great.
Sarah, Maddie, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a really candid, enlightening interview. And just a lot of respect for your journey. And it's super excited to see what happens in the future.
Yeah, thank you.
As are we.
Yeah, it's real, and it literally is an example of what happens when authenticity and honesty meet reality.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy that you gave us a few minutes to share your story. And I know that you're like a introvert, a closeted.
So much talking.
You're a closeted extrovert, acting like an introvert. And I know that wasn't the easiest thing in the world for you, Maddie, but thank you.
Yeah.
We appreciate that. And Sarah, good luck.
She's got my back, so I can do anything.
Again, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kyle.
The Latter Gay Stories podcast, your opportunity to understand the intersection of sexuality and reality, especially where it meets at LDS Street and LGBTQ Avenue. We thank you for giving us the opportunity to help you understand this topic a little better. If you're watching on our video version through Facebook or YouTube and have a question for Sarah or Maddie, feel free to drop it below. Be happy to answer some of those questions and help you and guide you through this path. If there's anything that resonated well in this story, or any advice or encouraging words you have for Sarah and Maddie, we invite you to share that below. Because I think, again, this, as we've discussed in this podcast episode, it has been a community effort. And if you are listening to this episode on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, or any of our other podcast players, we invite you to click that subscribe button and share this episode as well, so other people within our community and outside the community will be able to find this episode and others as they make their journey through understanding this topic, and also through building bridges between the LDS and LGBT communities. Again, we thank you for joining us on this episode and encourage you, as always, to continue writing your Latter Gay story.